Make the choice to begin anywhere in your life, and the journey has started. And along the way, be inspired. Listen to the stories by joining the president of Howard University, Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, on The Journey.
With a new Democratic administration in the White House and the Democratic Party holding the slimmest of majorities in the Senate, there's a new dynamic in our nation's capital, even as we continue to battle familiar foes, the coronavirus pandemic, climate change, and more. Hello, my name is Dr. Wayne Frederick, and my guest today on The Journey is the current Senate Majority Leader, the senior senator for the state of New York, and one of the most accomplished public servants in our country. Senator Schumer, welcome to The Journey.
Great to be here, Dr. Frederick, and I just learned that you're Trinidadian, and I told Dr. Frederick that there are probably more Trinidadians in Brooklyn than in Trinidad, which I'm proud of.
That might be true. Speaking of which, what was it like for you growing up in Brooklyn?
You know, Brooklyn was a great place. My father was an exterminator, you know, never went to college, and it was a working class community. But what was good is I learned a lot on the streets, frankly. My education at Madison High School wasn't bad, but I learned how to get along with all different kinds of people. We're a very diverse place in every way. And just how to, when you go to a big high school and when you are in a place like Brooklyn, there are so many different human and personal situations that you meet that it helps you. And so I think the education I got on the streets of Brooklyn was probably as good as the education, or as invaluable as the education I got at Harvard. It's not as good a college as Howard, so you might not be able to say that about if I went to Howard, but anyway.
I hear that. Well, you know, when I came here in 1988 to attend Howard, I had family who lived in Brooklyn, and so in my summers, I would hang out in Canarsie and on Church Avenue A and Church Avenue.
This is a Caribbean note. I was just there with the Haitian community, and we named Church Avenue, a part of Church Avenue that you mentioned, for Pierre Toussaint.
Oh, okay, that's excellent, excellent.
He was a Haitian hero.
Yeah, absolutely. There are few people who know the state of New York like you do. You've done something very unusual for any senator in the country, and that's visiting all 62 counties. And you do it consistently. Of all the counties that you visited in New York, tell the viewers about one that you think is probably least visited or least known, but you in particular enjoy going to that county.
Dr. Frederick, I'm going to tell you a funny little story, okay, that relates to this county. So when I ran in 1998, I ran against Al D'Amato, and he was using the upstate, downstate. I'm from Brooklyn, and you know, you'll never see Schumer west of the Hudson. I promised to visit every county if I won, and I did. And I've done it every year since. So I've been in every county at least 22 times, and half of them now 23. Even during COVID, I did.
Wow.
But after my first 6 years, I ran for re-election, and I carried all counties but one, 61 of the 62. And the one county I didn't carry, which is the one I'll mention, is Hamilton County. Hamilton County is in the middle of the Adirondacks. It has beautiful forests and lakes and great hiking and great fishing, but it's our smallest county. It has only 5,000 people, except in the summer when people go to the Adirondacks. Anyway, the day after I won, I got 71% of the vote, carried 61 counties. I'm bragging. And I'm saying to my chief of staff, why do you think it was, Martin Brennan is his name, that we carried every county but one? And he said, well, that's obvious, Chuck. And I said, why? And he said, well, you visited it 6 times, true to your promise to visit every county every year. I said, that's true. He said, it's our smallest county. It only has 5,000 people. I said, that's true. He said, well, it's the only county where you actually met every single voter.
I love that.
Anyway, Hamilton's a beautiful county.
Yep, I love that story. I know of Hamilton, New York. I don't know the county, Hamilton County as well. So you visited all the counties. You mentioned the pandemic just now. When you look back at the pandemic and how it really affected New York being the epicenter at one point here, what are your thoughts now about lessons learned from the pandemic, and what are your thoughts about where New York is today with respect to the pandemic?
Well, to answer your second question first, we're in much better shape now. When it first hit New York, people didn't really know what COVID was. We had many more deaths. than many other places, even with the number of people being sick. And so it hurt us rather significantly. But we learned from it and we've come back, and New York is beginning to open up. I still am, I was out at street markets, green markets this weekend, saying hello to the voters. First time I did it for a few times, but I've done it now more frequently. And people are coming back and people are moving back and everything else is happening. So that's one thing. But this is a very important lesson. I like to say, I speak on MLK Day every year, and I say Martin Luther King held up a giant mirror on his broad shoulders, and with his eloquence and with his brilliance and with his faith, he forced America to look into that mirror. They didn't like what they saw, and we began the slow road to equality. COVID, in a certain different way, did the same thing. It showed all the weaknesses in our society. Why did more people of color die or get COVID in New York and elsewhere? Because they had worse health care. Why did so many children, inner city and rural, lose out on schooling? Because they, unlike other people, didn't have broadband. Why was it that so many frontline workers, were just struggling? Because they were immigrants and they didn't get the benefits that other people needed and the help that other people needed. So sort of COVID held up, Dr. Frederick, a magnifying glass to our society, showed us things that were wrong with it long before COVID, but didn't come to the forefront until we had this crisis. And now our job in the Senate is to fix those problems, to make healthcare better, to give every family, whether it be rural or inner city, the broadband they need. All these kinds of things that we are trying in the plans that Joe Biden put together to make America a better, more equal place, and to deal with the underserved communities who've been constantly left out. So in the second bills that we did, where we had more say, for instance, money for small businesses, what we did is we said the smallest businesses, the inner city businesses, the people who didn't have a banker or accountant should go to the top of the list so they weren't pushed out by the big chains. Another thing, this was an interesting thought. I was visited by a group of ministers from the Baptist Church, the AME Church, and the Catholic Church. And they said there's no collection plate because there's no services. The churches are dying. And in many of our communities in New York, the churches are the glue. They do the social, not just bringing the message of God to the people, but they do the feeding the hungry and dealing with the kids and helping the seniors. So I put into that bill that the churches could get PPP money, and a lot of them have survived. In other words, we're learning lessons from COVID and we tried to make them better in this ARP bill.
Certainly.
And we're trying to make them better permanently. So one last one that I'm really proud of, led by Senators Bennett and Booker and Sherrod Brown of Ohio, is the child tax credit. We are increasing the child tax credit. So starting in July, every person, a single parent who makes below $75,000, a couple who makes below $150,000, will get $300 per month per child if they're 6 to 17, and $350 if they're between $250 per child if they're per month if they're between 6 and 17, $300 per child if they're below 6. It'll take half the kids in America out of poverty. Now we're doing that because of COVID, but we should make it permanent. That's what we're trying to do. And if we can take half the kids out of America out of poverty, it'll be great for the kids. A child born into poverty isn't often fed properly, clothed properly, educated properly, good health care. When they become 18, they're in a ditch. Many of them, to their credit, still climb out of the ditch, but many don't. This will be good not only for these kids to have them out of poverty, but good for their families and good for America. We'll have a much stronger, bigger labor force.
Certainly understand. We are extremely proud of the Vice President, as you can imagine. How it was signed into existence by the 17th President of the United States, a known misogynist, known racist, and Andrew Johnson, first U.S. President to be impeached. Despite that, and despite Howard being really created to educate slaves moving from the South, we've now educated the first female and first black Vice President. What are your thoughts, given the slim majority I mentioned in the introduction, of the role that VP Harris is playing and will play in this administration?
Well, first, of course, she's essential to us because if we get all 50 Democratic votes and get no Republican votes, as we have on ARP or on many of the nominees that President Biden has wanted in his cabinet, without her, we wouldn't get anywhere. But second, she has really, I've known her well. I knew her when she got to the Senate. I suggested to her, by the way, she get on the Judiciary and Intelligence Committees because I knew what a great prosecutor and lawyer she was, and she excelled on both of those committees. And it helped make a great name for herself that allowed her to run for president. And you know, then of course the rest is history when Joe Biden asked her to be his vice president on the ticket. But she's doing a great job in the administration. She is by Biden's side all the time. She is his #1 sounding board. So when he has an issue and it comes up, what do you think, Kamala? What do you think? And the fact, this is where diversity makes a huge difference. She's had a different experience than Joe Biden. That's good to have the various experiences of America, all with the input. So she's having a tremendous effect. Last night, he designated a few areas that she's going to take the lead on, where she'll do a great job. She is smart. She has real principle, but she's also practical and knows how to get things done. And I love people like that. You know, if you're practical and have no principles, you don't get much important done. If you're principled and not practical, you don't get the big important things done. But together you do, and she's just right.
So with that in mind, the practical and the principles, what are your suggestions about how the divide that seems to exist in our country can be closed? I think it is important for the young people who are coming to Howard University who want to make a change to hear all voices, but at the same time to recognize that they have to come together. Will our leaders, our political leaders, be able to demonstrate that to them in terms of the bills that are to come? An infrastructure bill is important. Every time I cross one of those bridges going into New York, I always think to myself, how do these bridges stand the test of time? And so I get that. And that's the part of the infrastructure bill that I think everybody understands. But there are parts, obviously, that the Democrats want that people may not see as infrastructure, but I do agree. Our hospitals, et cetera, those are part of the fabric of what makes a country work. How do you set an example for my young people here at Howard University as to how you can break that divide?
Okay, so let me say this, and this is takes a longer discussion than we have time for, but I'll try to get to the main points. One, the American people want big, bold change. They want real change. And that is not just Democrats. That's Democrats, Republicans, independents. That's young people, middle-aged people, old people. Why? Well, our society has changed. Technology, globalization, automation has made it harder for people to see a path forward in many ways. And so, you know, if you ask the average American, what is the American dream to you? They'd probably put it in simple terms. They'd say, if I work hard, I'll be doing better 10 years from now than I'm doing today, and my kids will be doing still better than me, okay? If you lose faith in that dream, you can turn to a divisive, nasty man like Donald Trump, who uses any device, including bigotry, to get his way. But if we can produce big, bold change, Dr. Frederick, we can unite Democrats antagonizing Donald.
Senator Schumer, it appears that your screen may be frozen. So we'll just give you a few seconds to come back in as you describe these big goals.
In a world where not enough, there are a lot of single parents trying to raise kids, or two parents, but they both have to work. In the old days, that didn't happen. There are human infrastructure issues. We want to make tuition free, community college free. We want to make daycare, pre-K education universal. So we're pushing for these things. And just since you have students listening to this, Elizabeth Warren and I are pushing for something else. We'd like $50,000 of student debt to be forgiven, which would be huge. So many people have this huge burden. The young people get out of college and they have a huge debt burden, and it gets in their way. They can't decide on their careers and on their families or buy a car or whatever else. And Joe Biden can do it with the flick of a pen. And incidentally, 28% of the wealth gap between black and white is caused by student debt. So it's a racial justice issue as well as an issue for all students. So what we're trying to do is bring people together on strong, bold programs they all like. And hopefully, eventually, the Republican senators and congressmen will follow. But right now, too many of them, Donald Trump threatens them and says, if you do anything to make Biden look good, this is the vindictive type of man he is, I'm going to go after you. And he has a lot of strength because he controls the right-wing media, you know, the Sean Hannitys of the world. He controls the right-wing money. And even in the primaries, who votes in the Republican primary, much smaller than the Republican electorate, tend to be the far-right Trump supporters. So what we have to do is go around the Republican senators to the people. And that worked on the ARP, and hopefully it'll work on the infrastructure bill, both the physical infrastructure and the human infrastructure. Sorry to give you a long answer.
No, I actually appreciate that. I appreciate that answer very much, because the next issue that I'd like you to address is the fact that the 2017 tax cuts decreased revenue coming into the government and therefore increased the deficit. And here we are spending trillions, albeit on good causes. And as one of my mentors used to say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. How do we find a middle road so that we don't leave this debt burden on our youth, which I think is a genuine concern that they have, and we don't become beholden to foreign governments who may be holding our debt?
It's a great question. I think what we do is we do try to pay for this, but not pay for it on the backs of the middle class, the working people, the poorer people. But Trump, over $2 trillion in deficit was created by the Trump tax cuts. 83% of them, something like this, went to the top, very top, highest level aside, a top 1%, top 10%. I think it's the top 1%. If we can undo a lot of those cuts, the corporate rate doesn't have to be as low as it is. We've been giving, Trump gave a huge break to people who invested their money, corporations who invested their money overseas. We should stop that. So we do have to be mindful of what you say, but I think there are revenues there if we raise taxes on the very well. And look, the very wealthy are doing great. God bless them. You know, I'm not against them doing great, but they should pay their fair share to make our society fairer and more equitable. And that's what we're going to try to do in this bill.
As we close, you mentioned that you attended Harvard and Harvard's law school, if I remember correctly. Some people on my campus will describe Harvard as the White Howard. So with that in mind, for the young people who are here today attending DHU, what would be your advice from the lessons that you've learned around leadership over the time that you've spent in public service?
First, in terms of choosing a career, my father was an exterminator, as I mentioned, didn't make much money. They wanted me to go make money. I practiced law. I went to law school, as you mentioned. I practiced law for a little while. I hated it. And my father was a small businessman, not very successful. And he paced the floor Sunday nights at 2 a.m. because he hated going to work. I said, I'm not going to repeat Dad's mistake and do something I hate. And so I love politics, and I ran for office, and no one thought I'd win. The funny story I tell is I went into my local barber for any Howardites from Brooklyn. It was on Nostrand Avenue. And I went into him and I said, would you put a poster in the window, Frankie? And he says, sure, kid. And then he said, kid, I never told you this. I'm not only the barber, I'm the local bookie. You're the 50-to-1 underdog. No one thought I'd win, I won. But do what you love. And that will let you lead. People, when you love your work, you do a better job. People are more willing to listen to your advice, to follow you. Don't do something because someone else tells you you ought to do it. Do something you know in your heart you love. And the other thing I would tell people is try to respect everybody's opinion, even when you don't agree with them. So I have a leadership team of 10 senators that we meet every Monday night to discuss the week and the month. You know who's on my leadership team? Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are two most progressive senators, and Joe Manchin and Mark Warner are two most conservative senators. And you know what I ask every one of that 10-member group? Respect each other. Don't cast aspersions on people's motivation, number one. Number two, I tell them, walk in the other person's shoes. West Virginia is not New York. But three, at the end of the day, we all have to come together. Without unity, we'll have nothing. That's advice I would give to people as well.
Well, thanks for being here. My guest today was Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democratic senator from the state of New York. I'm Dr. Wayne Frederick. Please join me next time on The Journey.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at WHUT.org. Thank you.